welcome all ISLI's friends. I am Claire McCann, current chair-elect of Graduate Student Network, GradiSense. I'm following Matías's footsteps. And so it is my honor to moderate this hybrid event today. I'm pleased to be in conversation with our speaker, Dr. Matías Flores, who has contributed a critical and incredibly rigorous study to our field in the form of his dissertation. So before we begin, I'm just going to give a little bit of background as to what Dissertation Dish is all about. So it's a collaboration between iSlice as well as Lead California and Give Pulse. Historically, we've strictly run these sessions quarterly in a webinar format, but this marks the second hybrid in-person session and virtual dish. So these are meant for all audiences, from seasoned scholars to practitioners to graduate students. So these presentations highlight some of the recent research in our fields, creating a way for journal editors as well as conference organizers to be exposed to new research and potential presenters, and to offer some support and possible guidance for those who are in graduate programs by way of tips from those who have just gone through the experience. So far, we have hosted 16 Dissertation Dish webinars. And today we're excited to feature Dr. Matías Flores, PhD in Development Sociology at Cornell. He currently serves as chair of our graduate student network of iSlice. He lives in Chile, working at Universidad de Chile on 2 book projects, one of which is about to come out. In the printing process. So he uses a socio-historical approach to study higher education community engagement. He focuses on 3 lines of research. Firstly, recovering the history of community engagement practices in the global south, focusing on Latin America. Secondly, understanding the politics and university imaginaries of next generation engaged scholars in Chile in a context of socio-political change. And thirdly, fostering a global dialogue in higher education community engagement, questioning the limits and potential reproduction of neo-colonial dynamics. So Matías is going to take us into the Chilean context today. The main purpose of his dissertation is to analyze how engaged scholars in Chile are embedded in the socio-political context, the socio-historical approach. So his study overall is presented in 3 articles that focus on 3 key areas of this context. So the first is the emergence of a new generation of engaged scholars. And if you went to his presentation earlier today, you would have got that first taste of the first bit. But today he's going to focus on the second 2 of these articles, which are the struggle to earn and maintain legitimacy and the entangled relation with academic capitalism. So I'm now going to hand the floor to Matías to take us through his insights and his learnings. But before I do that, I just want to remind everyone of a few logistical items, especially those who may be on Zoom. So if you are on Zoom, please stay muted during the presentation. But if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat space at any point. We will keep track of any questions for our Q&A session a little bit later. Again, for those in the room, please, if you have any questions, jot them down. We have a dedicated Q&A section. And we are, as has been said, recording this presentation, which will be available within a few days on Lead California's YouTube channel. So over to Matías.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you, iSlice, for organizing this. Lead California, Give Pulse, for this amazing collaboration that I got to participate as an organizer for a year, and now I'm really glad to be here. I would like to start mentioning that I really missed the presence of Chilean Flores. She was the one that was going to be here today sharing. She's the winner of the Dissertation Award of iSlice this year. So it's a huge honor and responsibility to keep that role. And I'm really happy to share this with you because it's also an emotional moment for me, finishing up a process of 5 years living in the US, going back to Chile, coming to South Africa, and it's also a way for me to start closing this chapter, but also starting a new life, a new adventure. So I feel like this is And sharing this moment with you it means a lot. And well, Claire mentioned a bit about my work. I'm gonna skip the lines of research that I do, but I'm gonna have a deep dive a deeper dive on this socio-historical approach. Okay? So what I understand in the different approaches to study community engagement, I identify 4 approaches. The first one is avoiding the topic, which is really common in the higher education field. In the sociology of higher education, you will see volumes of the future of higher education, the present of the past, the history, and community engagement will be if it's good in the margins of those volumes, and if it's not, people will forget about this or will not consider it as a part of this body of knowledge. That's changing, fortunately. And there are other 2 approaches. One is the normative approach, which is, as this field has to do a lot with social change. We have a lot of expectation of what this work could do. And a lot of times it has to do with setting high standards of what we expect this work to be. And in this case, it's all this line of work around critical service learning, for example, or critical community engagement, and the conversation about what is an authentic community engagement and what is not. Even it goes with this conversation around reciprocity and this high standard. The other way is the managerial approach, which is its goal is to find better ways to improve how we do community engagement, how to improve the practice of community engagement. And that's usually, this is the field, the approach where you refine the models, the ways of evaluating, for example, the impact of students. And that is a lot to do with improving practices, but also talking to an audience that is the authorities of the university. They are in the struggle of building a body of data that will show the authorities that this is something valuable, that this is something important. And unfortunately, a lot of this research is not necessarily concerned about the why we do community engagement. And the research usually could be a bit abstract, like sustainable development, or other concept that could be in this kind of research, but it's not necessarily something that is problematic. And the social historical approach, I understand as a way of trying to separate from a mainstream definition of community engagement and trying to deconstruct each one of its parts. Community is not a settled piece or setting or people. It's a place of conflicts, a different interest. Universities cannot be the same if we're talking about universities in South Africa, universities in the US, universities in Chile. Even in each country, you will find differences in terms of the universities. And in differences also in what it means for a society in terms of how it becomes to be a university, what is understood, the expectations in relationship with the society. And also within the university, you will have different actors and different interests. In one department, you will have each office, different purposes in something that in a report could be the same thing, different interests. And I'm trying to, with this also historical approach, trying to understand that diversity and describe and analyze those conflicts. Engagement, the same thing, is not just something that is one-way or two-way relationship. Any social relationship is a two-way relationship. Oppression, dominations are things that also need the participation, the active participation of the oppressed, the dominated. And and I understand it as a co-constituted network, that it could be weak, it could be strong, but it changes over time. It's not only one way. And why Chile? It's not just because I'm in Chile. It is because Chile is a good example of a neoliberal higher education system. Since the early 80s, we shifted from a mostly public higher education system into a privatized system. Yeah, all those policies implemented during a dictatorship. So we shift. Now we are more than 80% of the students study in private university. And that exploded in 2006 and because higher education also almost became a fraud for certain institutions and students, low quality education. And the government created a national accreditation commission. As you can find in the supermarket, different stamps in a product, universities have different years in terms of to say how good they are. And this will give them access to public funding. Either if you're public or private university, you will have public funding if you are accredited. And all these neoliberal policies were started to be rejected by a social movement in 2011, led by students. One of their main, most important leaders is now the president of Chile. And in 2018, the current president of the republic. And in 2018, a new higher education law was created that generated a change in the accreditation system. Something that I forgot to mention is this system created a voluntary area of accreditation on community engagement. But it was voluntary. In 2018, it became mandatory. So since that moment on, what the interpretation is that we're leading a process of first national reform on community engagement, and now since that year, all the universities and 2 years institutions are running in circles trying to create their policies, their budget, and their structures to promote community engagement. Something that I'm not going to talk that much now. I'll talk a bit about this in the morning. Is that also Chile, from that student movement in 2011, experienced a rise of social demonstrations that ended up in 2019 in a social uprising. Out of that process, we started a constituent movement. We tried to change our constitution, our neoliberal constitution, inherited by the dictatorship, created by the dictatorship, and we created two proposals that were rejected. We didn't have a solution to that process, but the crisis is still there. So all what I'm gonna be talking is this constant conflict, both of a neoliberal system, but also the resistance from different actors to that process. The questions are: how are engaged scholars connected with this broader socio-political context in Chile today? I wanted to work on engaged scholars because there are some research in Chile, but it's mostly for either students or institutions and institutionalization. And I wanted to see the perspective of the scholars. The questions that I'm going to be covering today: how do engaged scholars navigate earning and maintaining legitimacy, and how do their practice entangle with the broader structural process of academic capitalism. My research design is a qualitative methodology, a contracted research method. I focus on two institutions, one public, one private, 40 engaged scholars, 12 non-engaged scholars. I can talk a bit about what that means. And well, I'm not going to talk about this, but just to know, Chile has a long history of community engagement work. So what is happening now, this neoliberal system, the neoliberal context, is not the only way that we've been doing community engagement in our system. There are different approaches, different models. We're experiencing one, and I wanted to understand from this socio-historical perspective what is happening now specifically. And the first article is Engaged Scholars Navigating Legitimacy. And here I was engaging with a literature on the World Class University project, which is a governance force that generates the imitation of universities to one kind of model of university that is expressed on global rankings. Global ranking will promote universities that have a high focus on research and publications, certain kind of journals. In the case of countries, Spanish-speaking countries, that means that scholars need to be publishing in English in journals that are not in their countries. But this focus on research is something that we know we experience everywhere, and that's called the World Class University Project. In Chilean scholars has been there's evidence of they are accepting this model in a way, but also resisting it because it doesn't make sense to publish in English, for example, or just to be evaluated by the number of publications and not the quality of it. There are some strategies of resistance that is kind of a silent resistance, which is for example, building strategies to collaborate in co-author pieces, so they can maintain their status within the university. So a lot of tricks to keep this nonsense going. In terms of engagement and legitimacy, I use the word. So in terms of community engagement and legitimacy, I focus a lot in the work of Omira and Gonzalez, I think, who were looking at the legitimacy of engaged scholars in the US. And I use that because they were looking at the research university. So the legitimacy with research university. And the research university in the US is the paradigm of the world-class university. So I took those categories to see if what I could find in the Chilean context. So the concept of framework drawing from a new institutionalization, the global isomorphism, which means these global forces universities tend to be mimicking each other. In this case, drawing from this paradigm, and I'm going to be talking about this agency practices. So how scholars try to earn and maintain the legitimacy within the context. And the first thing that I noticed, just here coming to the findings, and I'm really late on time, I think. But is that community engagement is not part of the world-class university project. It's not expected, it's not part of the rankings. There's one that could be connected, that is the Times Higher Education Impact, but the real ones, they are not including community engagement. And this is professor, he's a non-engaged scholar, a dean in one of the faculty schools. Community engagement is the thing that fell into those who do not do other things. I mean, those working the most on community engagement and those who do not do research, those who do not publish, those who do not have a certain name, so to speak. And he laughed. They are like the laborers. But still, there's a conditioned legitimacy within Chilean universities that is given because of the mandatory accreditation. So the university, even if it's not part of the world-class university, doing community engagement will give you the accreditation, which is a proxy of excellence, but also something that is used in the university market to get more students, and so it's useful. It has a function, not necessarily because they believe on community engagement. It's tolerated. And what I found is three different agentic practices in this conditional legitimacy. One is operationalizing this mandate from the accreditation system. So these are scholars that are trying to maintain their legitimacy by following this small window and accepting that small window. So their efforts are oriented to create the best reports whenever the accreditation comes, and sticking to what they are hired for. In this case, a lot of them is service learning courses or community-based learning courses or engaged learning classes, and they only have to do that. They are not asked to do research or any other kind of academic work. And some of them, they haven't finished they haven't started their PhD. There is a division of labor within the university, so this is something that some scholars are going to do. The others are the negotiatings, are the ones that, coming from this stage, they are starting to realize that the work of community engagement is bigger than the university believes it is. So they find in their work that they are generating data, they are improving teaching and learning, they are contributing to their discourse. So they're trying to argue with the other people that don't believe that, to say, well, this is something important, not just because we need the accreditation, it's something that is important because my discipline in the last 20 years has been shifting to a more participatory approach, or because is important for the students, not just because of their soft skills, because they want to change the society. So they're trying to identify sources of legitimacy that are not necessarily from the accreditation or the community engagement by itself. But still, these people is almost drowning in this condition because this is something that nobody's asking them to do. So they have to do it for free, pro bono, or in the free time, and being helped by their families on the weekends, and things like that. And the other side is those that reject the world-class university model and trying to resist this situation and resist the accreditation by itself, and they're drawing not just for these elements, but also from a longer tradition of the Latin American university. They have this feeling that before the dictatorship, there was a different understanding of what universities should be doing. And they learned that not because they read a book, not because they noticed that in any place, it's because of a social memory. Every scholar learned how to be a scholar from another scholar. And that intergeneration is a social memory that is still there, both in public universities and private universities. And those are the ones that are resisting this promoting an alternative model of university. And I don't have much time to this stage, like 5 minutes, right?
You got 15 minutes.
Good. Okay, awesome. So what? And the other article is community engagement and academic capitalism, the co-production and entanglement. And here I draw from a literature. You won't see that, but you won't read. But it's there's a small amount of literature about trying to understand the relationship between neoliberalism and community engagement. I would say the mainstream idea and the most optimistic one is like community engagement is a response to neoliberal policies in higher education. It offers an alternative and is a resistance by itself, is picturing a new way of doing universities. But the research that has been done on this topic, the findings are different. There's people that says that argue that neoliberalism is altering, is changing the way of doing community engagement. So it's more like this argument of there's kind of attrition, like going away from the principles of community engagement. But others are more on the lines of noticing the entanglement between the two processes. And there's a co-production of the two. And I'm going to talk about what I found about that. It's not really useful, but the conceptual framework, I understand academic capitalism as this new regime. Universities tend to market and market-like behaviors. Scholars are encouraged to link with the industry. Students perceive as clients, and new managerial functionality is applies both to scholars and staff. And that is something that the concept was identified at first in the US, and from that it's been a different conversation globally about what it is and the different categories that are included in the concept of academic capitalism. Just to show the categories that I use, the operationalization of the concept, political economy, it contains marketization of university, privatization, commodification, commercialization, financialization, and in terms of the organizational field, the entrepreneurial university and managerialism. The only one that I couldn't find was the relationship with financialization. In terms of the concept of co-production, drawing from science and technology studies and the history of universities, there's this idea that there's no clear line between the relationship between science and capitalism in a way that science is not the producer of capitalism, neither capitalism is the producer of science. That is kind of the debate. The approach that I'm using is more like this is a question of empirical analysis. So having an open mind to see how that relationship entangles in different contexts. So that's why at the beginning I was telling you this context of Chile and why this is It's a question that is so marketization. It has to do with creating a market of universities. So there's a competition between universities for funding. In this case, in Chile, is getting a student enrollment. And in that competition, community engagement becomes a commodity. So it's something that they are using to compete in this setting. They are using it as something, in the case of the private universities, to cover certain discourse that they are only about profit. And in case of the public universities, is in the case of Chile, what I found is this idea that they are only about the protest and demonstration. And community engagement is a tool for them to say, well, the students are not only that, they're also doing other kind of things with the community. So both institutions are using this in that way. Privatization is, so this majority of private institutions in higher education and this idea of building a sense of the students being a client. And here's the university is not the Hogar de Cristo, which is an NGO. It is a company. It is not going to put money in something that is not going to be useful. And in this case, it is this relationship with finding new enrollment. And here, the use of social media and always getting good pictures of the work that is being done, that is kind of the tools that I found. Commodification of teaching. So the student treated as a client with community engagement appears as something that the student doesn't quite understand. And some students will think that if they are paying for a service, why they are serving someone else for free. So this is one of the things that they mentioned. The students now ask what monetary benefits they are going to get. I have heard, well, they are going to pay me for, are they going to pay me for this? I'm not an NGO. The other is the commercialization, and in terms of how the university sells a product. It's starting to sell products for a profit, for a fee. And in the case of community engagement, it could be found as services for a fee, but also a transition from a pure community engagement project for free for the community into something that then is charged. In this case, through continuing education. So, for example, a professor that creates a project, they will test the ideas, their themes, they will learn, they will gather data, and with that new knowledge, not because they want to, because, for example, if it was a successful project, the university asks them to continue doing the thing, but they don't give them the funding to do so. And in Chile, we don't have these big funders, these endowments where you can get money from nowhere and that you don't know who the person is. No. The only way is it through the market. So the universities officials, the head of the department, tell the disengaged scholar, well, why don't you create a new course on this topic and you start charging school teachers about it. So a project with a school, it becomes something that is more in the line of professional development for a fee. In terms of the organizational field, there is this entrepreneurial ethos of trying to see everything as an opportunity in the market and trying to create a connection between different units within the university. And so, for example, there's these cases of engaged scholars, real or the directors of departments, head of the departments, looking at community engagement projects and looking at opportunities everywhere. So for these fairs that the university do in the schools to offer to show them their degrees, their careers, and they say, well, send an engaged scholar there and see if there's an opportunity to do a community engagement project. So there's this kind of connection. Managerialism is one of the biggest issues there in terms of, because the accreditation comes with this process of rationalization, standardization. quantification of community engagement. So the university is asking the numbers because of the accreditation. The scholar doesn't leave the community engagement as a number. There's way more than just that. So there's that a divide, but it's not a divide that is rejected by itself. Engaged scholars value the accreditation system because they know if it were not any accreditation, no one will care about community engagement. So they say, yeah, let's do it, but now they are dealing with all the consequences of that. So key findings on these two papers. So first is what I mentioned. There's a conditional legitimacy to engage scholars and different ways, the three different agent practices to respond to that lack of legitimacy. What is new, what it would be interesting is to see, and different from the literature about this topic, is that these are not barriers of community engagement. These are symptoms of something else operating in universities. And the resisting part, it goes beyond what is being found in terms of the resisting the world-class university generally. To engage scholars, what they're doing, this group that I mentioned, they're offering something else. It's not just this silent activism, it's an alternative that they're practicing, and that brings something really unique. Academic capitalism and this co-production not only co-produces service for a fee, creates entrepreneurs, consumers, clients, market niches, and a rationalization process, pressing professionalization and standardization. And this co-production is it's expressed in different levels. But here are some of the open questions that comes from this that I would like to discuss with you. And one is the tension between rationalization and routinization, drawing from this process of accreditations. And the other is that I want to discuss and continue doing research about is the role of the Latin American university. And if it truly becomes like an alternative to the world-class university model, and how a community engagement can also strengthen that historical tradition. The implications in terms of conditional legitimacy, one of them is I'm interested in looking at the academic character of community engagement. So it's looking at how each discipline is understanding this. Some people say the dialogical turn or this shift toward more participation. That is something that is happening with different names. It's not community engagement, it's not service learning, but it is out there. And these scholars are using that. They are not quoting Ayers-Leis. They're quoting within their own disciplines, people that are trailblazers somehow. The other is the conversation about university projects. And in terms of academic capitalism, the conversation about the value of community engagement, not just the moral value, is the economic value of the process. And for example, this case of transition to something that is for free, to something that is paid, the community members don't know that they are contributing to something like that. They are giving the experience, the space to pilot something, and the question is like, what do we do with that? Like, it's something that we openly talk about. I know the technology transfer world of higher education, they have they know pretty well that process. They have conflict of interest statement. They have fake patents and things like that. It's something that community engagement should be thinking. And the other is the accreditation process as an attention technology artifact. So it creates a legitimacy, but also certain constraints. And how is that going to unfold on time is something that Chile could be a good example to look at. How's that going? For sure, what is happening with the Carnegie classification in the US, but the difference is that it's a voluntary process. And all the accreditation systems are different, but it would be an interesting set of research or conversation that we could have later. Future plans, I don't want to spend that much time there, but just want to say that this week is in the printer my first book, co-edited with co-authored with Ariadna Viotti. She's a historian from the archives of the University of Chile. This is a 180 years history of community engagement. We call it extension, and there's a whole argument about what is this important. And yeah, here's my list of publications recently about community engagement. And if you want to take a picture of the QR, you will have access to all of them in my ResearchGate website. Thank you so much.
Stay seated. Thank you so much, Matías, for a complex, critical, and I would say evocative presentation that makes us think a lot about what community engagement means in our university institutions. Before we open up for questions, I just want to offer a few reflections. So I know I'm leaving thinking about our histories of community engagement and how those may be sources for inspiration and knowledge as we seek to imagine alternatives. I'm thinking about our accreditation processes, which I have previously thought about as signs of victory or capture, but perhaps I should be thinking in terms of entanglement now. And then I'm thinking about resistance, resistance not as one person solely trying to change the status quo, but a deeply nuanced concept of probably all of us trying to shift university processes from within and building alternative imaginaries as a really significant part of this process. And I'm thinking about how Global South universities who maybe exist on the peripheries of this world-class university project could be the opportunity we use to create those alternative imaginaries. And I think that speaks to, in fact, what a lot of the presentations have been about and what we're all trying to do in our work. So thank you very much, Matías. I think we can give him another round of applause. And then I'm going to monopolize my role as moderator of the session to ask the first question because I'm really interested in your non-engaged scholars who you've interviewed. I'd love to hear if there were any specific insights that emerged from those conversations that you might be willing to share.
Yeah. So one of them is the label. Like what I did as an ethnographic approach, I was building my interviews while I was doing them. And I started with what they were considered engaged scholars. And they were telling me their stories, and I asked them at the end, like, what are the scholars that are not doing community engagement work that could be interesting to talk with, that are thinking something differently. I always wanted to reach to them to see this counterpart. And and it was interesting because a lot of them started right away and saying, "Well, I've done community engagement, and I am." They did while ago, and they did it while ago, or they're seeing community engagement as TV participation on TV, things like that. And they have a different understanding of engagement. So one thing that that I got is like there's this defense of their work as something that is not, even if they don't believe that community engagement is important, they don't want to see themselves as a non-engaged scholar. And the other is that there are, in this case of people that stopped doing community engagement, there were some interesting stories connected with the world-class university. It was not paying off their way to become a scholar. So they gave up, and they noticed that it wasn't important. And they are reproducing that in their own labs or their own departments. And they, some of the quotes goes in the lines of, well, if you want to do that, you will have to find another place in the universe. This is not a place to do this kind of work, and you will suffer. First, become a professor, publish, and if you have time during the weekend, you can. It was really interesting to hear those opinions because we kind of all know that people think like that, but it was nice to have them say that on record.
And I'll open up to questions from the floor.
Thank you, Matías, first of all, for your wonderful research, and congratulations for your degree. And, in thinking about these different framings of community engagement, at an institution, like you mentioned, you work at some research universities that are very comprehensive. They do a lot of different things. Is there space to do different kinds of community engagement with different purposes behind them? Some of them may be liberal, some may be other framings. And can they coexist? Or do you feel that there's a need to sort of generate a certain framing for an institution engagement? And what do you think from your research? Do you think is there a balance, or is there a conflict in having these coexist?
Yeah, I will have an answer about that from my own practice as a staff member at the Office of Community Engagement at the University of Chile. And I really like how when they created their policy of community engagement, they decided to have a really abstract definition of engagement. It was more in lines of interactions with university actors, and they separated the definition from the principles that this should have, more in the lines of goals that the university should be aiming to, within them reciprocity and others. So it was quite open and embracing different ways of engagement. And I felt that it was really smart because it didn't generate a struggle within the university about what is community engagement, and but allow the institution to fill this gap and understand that community engagement it is always community engagement, it is always engagement, but it could be always better. You can always do something to reach those principles. And in that logic, there's so much that you can do because you're not going office to office to say, well, you're not doing it like correctly. No, you're doing this is great. Let's try to learn from this process and build from it something better, even better. And that was really smart. It's something similar that is happening with service learning. Service learning at the beginning, the University of Chile wanted to create it and replicate it in all the schools, and got the immediate rejection from the scholars and the different schools because it was felt like an imposition. It was felt like something that came from the US and didn't acknowledge their traditions. And because what they were doing was more complex than service learning. And that was 10 years ago. What they're doing now is they're talking about broadly in community-based learning or something like that. So they are open to, and they see service learning as one of the possibilities. So they're, that logic is the one that makes sense to me in terms of practice. In terms of research and what I found, I can share a bit of something that I shared this morning, which was the first article. So, and I was interested about this thing of purposes. So I tried to understand, because the scholars were not just doing this thing because it was mandatory in the accreditation. They wanted to do something. And that is the first article that I wrote that is connected with this socio-political context of change. So most of the scholars wanted to be their engaged scholarship as contributing to this process, but in different ways. And some of them were more in the line of changing everything, society, university. Others were feeling like they are part of the community, they have experienced exclusion, discrimination, and they want to do something about it. Others are aiming towards changing public policy. Others from the science communication area are more on the lines of trying to build critical thinking. Others are helping, which comes with a more charity kind of approach. And others are just doing it because it's part of their contract. So there's different ways to do it. And I would say the youth institutions usually try to set certain purposes and standards, and they're using really abstract words. And I think that's okay in a way. But what I found in this article is like my recommendation is try to ask your scholars what are they what why are they doing this work, and trying to build that. Some of them never ask that question. So it's a conversation that goes in the lines of building universities or understanding universities as a living thing. It's something that is made by scholars, and universities and Office of Community engagement should be facilitating that reflection on that process, not just imposing one way that should be the right way to do it.
So this might be off topic, so you can say like, oh, I don't really want to talk about that, but I'm really curious what got you interested in this. What were the experiences that you had? Was it your own interaction as a student with faculty members? What was it that compelled you to look at these topics?
Yeah, that's really interesting because it's part of my trajectory. I come into community engagement after being an activist. So in 2011, this student movement. I was in this student movement. I was in my second year in sociology. I was an undergrad. It was my second year, and it was 8-month strike that we had. And during that 8-month strike, we were not doing nothing. We were doing a community organizing work and trying to support the protests and the occupation of buildings, student school buildings, all over the city and the country. And when we returned, we wanted to keep doing that work because that's what we wanted, but we didn't have the time. And what ignited everything, it was this professor from the Department of Sociology that was telling us, well, you can continue doing this through my class, which was a qualitative method for 1 year that you had to do a project with the community. And he was telling, well, you can do a participatory action research, which is a Latin American tradition that comes from Colombia, and this is part of what we understand as sociology. So that was one thing. And the other is like, well, and this is also what we understand as university extension. And this university, the University of Chile, has always been doing this. So I felt welcome in this field as an activist, and I saw my opportunity of being in the university as something that was useful for others, and my own project of thinking, changing Chile, changing neoliberal policy in higher education. But at the same time, I started looking back at the history, and it was amazing. It was always tracing, trying. There was no book about it. It was always like little things that I had to connect. But then I noticed that other countries in Latin America have a different story, because after the dictatorship ended, they recovered that tradition of Latin American universities. They didn't shift towards a neoliberal system. So they have big extension services that are not extension like in the US, where it's more like the agricultural. This is extension, Latin American extension, that is also drawing from Paulo Freire, and a whole different thing. And then I met Paulette Dognac. She did her PhD in England, in the UK, and she participated in Ireland. She was in the Ireland conference. And we started to talk about how in this field, no one was talking about that tradition of engagement. What they knew was service learning, flies, but that was just one little bit of the history. And we made our own project to try to bring that conversation into the table. She published amazing articles in Spanish, trying to understand this combination of concepts. And I decided to study my PhD in the US because of that, trying to bring that experience here and having this kind of conversation.
Curious. to understand whether there's any other groups that sector would and then my second question would be, what all the reasons why you consider that you have such a rich experience of going through years of engaging with people, you say, was it a good thing? Was it a bad? You think with everything that it turns out to be, you still think it was good that it was.
Yeah. So other cases, I know that there are other accreditations that include an area of community engagement. I think here in South Africa there's something like, but I haven't made that comparison. One of the things that I wanted to do in the PhD was a comparative study about this, but a good advice from my advisor was focus on something and some place, and then you can do the other thing. So now I'm more than open to contribute to some study that goes in that line, comparing with other places. I know Colombia has something like that, but I don't know the mandatory thing. To be voluntary. And if it's good or if it's not good, I'm not thinking this about in those terms. Like I think it's an open question. I mean, in this moment, what I found are these tensions. Those tensions can be addressed. So I believe it's a good thing that now people are talking about it. That's a good thing. But the ultimate outcome, we'll see. Like for me, what is good, and that's why I'm doing this other line of historical research, is trying to understand that we don't need to answer this tension, to solve this tension. We don't need to see other countries or other places. We don't need to look far away to solve it. We need to look at our experiences and the history of community engagement in the global south, and I would say the global north too, but more scientifically, is a tragic history. It's not a linear history of the scholars becoming more engaged and scholars realizing that they need to do more. It's an effort of cycles, people realizing that they need to do more, and then there's a backlash, different kind of backlash. I think that's we're looking at in the US right now. But in Chile it was the dictatorship or the ideas of the university. So I believe that that's the we need to learn have some lessons out of those cycles and we can do it from our own experience. And I think that would be good. That would be good that we start paying more attention about our values, our culture, our history, and I think that would be good.
Yeah. So the luxury to spend so much time to focus on this. So this is what dissertations are for, right? To give you the opportunity to dig deep into a subject. So I'm curious about, now that you've taken a big picture look at this history, are you thinking about changing anything in your practice of community engagement based on what you've learned?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I came back to Chile a month ago, and now I regained my connections with the Department of Sociology. I want to do my postdoc there. I'm still waiting because I need to apply for a grant that will be in 2027. But in between, I'm already again teaching about participatory action research. Now I'm going to be teaching to professionals of the health area. It's a small course. It's a continuing education plan, but it's for free for them because it's with the government. But and also I was invited to edit a special issue in the Journal of Sociology of that university on participatory action research. So I'm also doing that. so I will say that now it's like trying to gain touch again with that approach, try to also understand what are the contributions from that practice to the discipline, in this case sociology. And so that's one thing that I want to do in terms of practice. And what I do know now is like there's a bunch of people doing participatory actions in different places, so I have more tools to keep doing that. But I will say that my scholarship will be both doing research that's not necessarily participatory, so it could be qualitative. If I had the data, I would do quantitative and participatory research. So I'm in the process of discovering. I've been a month, 1 month just back in Chile, so and it was difficult being in the US and think about community and what kind of involvement it could do if I was away. So now I think those questions are coming up.